I never thought I'd be telling this story to anyone. But here we are. Maybe if I explain everything from the beginning, people will understand that I'm not the monster Calvin made me out to be in court. Maybe they'll see that what happened was just one mistake, blown completely out of proportion by a man who was looking for any excuse to destroy our marriage. Calvin and I had been married for 6 years when everything fell apart. We had Eric when I was 24, and honestly, those early years were harder than anyone prepares you for. Calvin threw himself into being super dad from day one, teaching Eric these elaborate songs for everything, cutting sandwich crusts into perfect little shapes, getting down on the floor to build block towers for hours. Meanwhile, I felt like I was disappearing. I went from being this vibrant woman with dreams and ambitions to just being Eric's mom and Calvin's wife. Don't get me wrong, I love my son. But watching Calvin get all excited about teaching a 4-year-old to tie his shoes was honestly embarrassing sometimes. He'd use this stupid baby voice and act like every little milestone was the most amazing thing in the world. And then he'd wonder why I wasn't in the mood later. Like, sorry babe, but watching you explain why we can't have ice cream for dinner doesn't exactly get me hot and bothered. Calvin worked construction, which meant he was gone early, but home by 3 most days. That should have been great, right? But instead of giving me time to myself, he'd take over with Eric the second he walked through the door. He'd swoop in like I'd been doing everything wrong, reorganizing Eric's toys or redoing his hair or changing his clothes. He looks cold, he'd say, or, did he eat lunch yet? Like I hadn't been taking care of our kid all morning. The worst part was how everyone praised him for being such a hands-on dad. His mother, my mother, random strangers at the grocery store, they all acted like he deserved a medal for doing basic parenting. Meanwhile, everything I did was just expected. Nobody congratulated me for getting Eric dressed and fed every morning, or for keeping the house running, or for remembering to schedule doctor's appointments. I started feeling invisible. Calvin would come home and immediately focus on Eric, asking about his day, wanting to hear about every little thing he'd done. But he barely looked at me. I'd try to tell him about something funny Eric said or a problem I was dealing with, and he'd just nod while scrolling through his phone. It was like I only mattered as Eric's caretaker, not as his wife or as a person with my own thoughts and feelings. That's how I ended up noticing Cole at the bank. I'd been going to the same branch for years, but one day there was this new teller with dark hair and the most incredible smile. He actually looked at me, really looked at me. When I walked up to his window, he asked about my day and seemed genuinely interested in my answer. When I mentioned Eric, he didn't immediately launch into some story about his own kids or his nephew or whatever. He kept the focus on me. "You must be busy with a little one at home," he said, and something about the way he said it made me feel seen. Not just as a mom, but as a woman who was handling a lot and deserving of recognition for it. I started going to the bank more often, always hoping Cole would be working. We'd chat for a few minutes each time, and I found myself looking forward to those conversations all week. He'd remember things I'd mentioned before, that Eric was starting to read, that I was thinking about going back to work, that I felt overwhelmed sometimes. Calvin never remembered details like that about my life. After a few months, Cole started making comments about how nice I looked, or how lucky my husband was. I told myself it was just friendly conversation, but I'd started putting on makeup and wearing my better clothes on bank days. I felt attractive again, interesting again. For 20 minutes twice a week, I wasn't just Eric's mom or Calvin's wife. I was Alina, a woman worth flirting with. The first time Cole suggested we get coffee, I said no. But he kept asking, and eventually I started thinking, why shouldn't I? Calvin spent hours at his friend Hayden's house working on woodworking projects. He never invited me or seemed to think I might want adult conversation too. He just announced he was going to Hayden's and leave me with Eric for entire afternoons. When I finally said yes to coffee with Cole, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. We talked for 2 hours about everything. Books, movies, places we wanted to travel, dreams we'd had before life got complicated. He told me I was smart and funny and beautiful. When was the last time Calvin had said any of those things? Coffee turned into lunch. Lunch turned into longer conversations in his car after the bank closed. I told myself we were just friends, that I needed this outlet, that it wasn't hurting anyone. Calvin never even noticed when I was gone longer than usual. He'd be so focused on Eric that I could have been gone for hours without him realizing. The physical stuff started gradually. A hand on my arm when he was making a point, sitting closer together in his car, longer hugs when we said goodbye. I kept telling myself it wasn't really cheating because we weren't having sex, but I knew I was lying to myself. I was getting something from Cole that I wasn't getting at home. Attention, desire, the feeling that I mattered as more than just a caretaker. Calvin had taught Eric this ridiculous song with our phone numbers and address in case he ever got lost. He was always paranoid about safety stuff, making Eric practice what to do if strangers approached him or if he couldn't find us in a store. It was sweet, I guess, but also kind of obsessive. Eric knew that song better than he knew his ABCs. The day everything fell apart started like any other. Calvin announced he was going to Hayden's to work on some cabinet project and would be gone most of the afternoon. I'd been texting with Cole all morning, and he mentioned that he had the day off. Perfect opportunity, he said, and I knew what he meant. I told myself I'd just take Eric to the mall for a quick trip, maybe let Cole meet us there for a few minutes. Nothing major, just a chance to see him outside of our usual bank meetings. But when Cole suggested we could have some real privacy in his truck, I started rationalizing. Eric would be fine in the car for a few minutes. The weather was nice, I'd leave the AC running, and I could see the car from wherever Cole parked. Getting Eric ready felt different that day. I was impatient with his questions, annoyed when he wanted to bring 3 different toys, frustrated when he needed to use the bathroom right as we were leaving. I kept thinking about Cole, about finally having time alone with him, about feeling desired and wanted instead of just useful. At the mall, I spotted Cole's truck immediately. He'd parked away from the main entrance, which should have been a red flag, but I was too excited to think clearly. Eric was settled in his car seat with his tablet, and I told him I'd be right back. "Where are you going, Mommy?" he asked, and I said I needed to talk to someone about work stuff. It wasn't technically a lie. Cole did work at the bank. "Can I come?" "No, baby, it's boring grown-up talk. Just watch your show, okay? I'll be back in a few minutes." I left the car running with the AC on and walked over to Cole's truck. He was grinning when I climbed into the passenger seat, and for the first time in months, I felt alive. Really, truly alive. What happened next was everything I'd been missing at home. Cole made me feel beautiful, desired, important. We talked and laughed, and yes, we did more than that. For 45 minutes, I forgot about everything else. The laundry waiting at home, the grocery list on my phone, the constant background worry about whether I was doing enough, being enough, giving enough to everyone else. I had my phone on silent because I wanted to be completely present for this moment I'd been craving for so long. I deserved this. I deserved to feel wanted and appreciated and sexy. Calvin certainly wasn't making me feel any of those things. When my phone finally buzzed with a call from Calvin, I almost didn't answer. I was still in Cole's truck, still in that perfect bubble where I was just Alina, not anyone's mom or wife. But something made me pick up. "Hi, babe," I said, trying to sound normal. "Where are you?" Calvin's voice was tight, strained in a way I'd never heard before. "I'm at the mall with Eric." "Why? What's wrong?" "Alina, I'm at the mall. I'm in the security office with Eric. Where the hell are you?" The words didn't make sense at first. Security office? Why would Eric be there? I looked toward where I'd parked our car, but I couldn't see it clearly from Cole's truck. "What do you mean security office?" "I'm here. I'm at the mall. Someone found Eric crying in the car by himself. In the running car, Alina, by himself." My stomach dropped, but I forced myself to stay calm. "That's impossible. I was in the mall getting some stuff. I've been checking on him." "For 45 minutes? You left our 4-year-old son alone in a car for 45 minutes? 45 minutes? It couldn't have been that long. It felt like 10, maybe 15 minutes tops." But Calvin sounded furious, and there was background noise I couldn't identify. "I'm coming," I said, and hung up. Cole was staring at me with concern, but also something that looked like panic. "Everything okay? I have to go." There's some kind of misunderstanding. I practically ran across the parking lot to the mall entrance, my mind racing. This was all blown out of proportion. Eric was fine. He had to be fine. I'd left the car running, he had his tablet, and it really hadn't been that long. Maybe someone overreacted when they saw a kid in a car and called security for no reason. The security office was near the customer service desk, and I could hear Eric's voice before I even walked in. He was talking to Calvin about the song, the stupid safety song Calvin had taught him. "Daddy, I remembered the whole thing. The security man called you because I remembered." Calvin looked up when I walked in, and I'd never seen him look at me like that before. Cold. Completely cold. "There you are," he said, and his voice was steady, but I could hear the anger underneath. "Eric, tell Mommy what happened." "I was watching my show, and then I got scared because you were gone for a really long time, and this lady knocked on the window and asked if I was okay, and I started crying, and then the security man came and I sang him the song, and he called Daddy." The security guard, a middle-aged black man with kind eyes, was watching this whole interaction with obvious concern. "Ma'am, we need to ask where you were during this time. Your son was alone in the vehicle for approximately 45 minutes. "I was in the mall," I said automatically. "I was shopping, and I guess I lost track of time. It wasn't 45 minutes. Calvin stood up slowly. "What store? What store were you shopping in, Alina?" I looked around the security office, at Eric eating animal crackers someone had given him, at the guard taking notes, at Calvin staring at me with those cold eyes. I went to a few different places. "Show me your receipts. I didn't buy anything." "Your bags, then." "Calvin, what is this?" "Eric's fine. I made a mistake. I lost track of time, but he's fine." The security guard cleared his throat. "Ma'am, I do need to document where you were during this incident, for our report." I felt trapped, surrounded by all these judgmental faces. "I was meeting someone about a job opportunity, if you must know." A brief meeting that ran longer than expected. "A job opportunity?" Calvin repeated slowly. "At the mall." "Yes." "What kind of job?" It doesn't matter. The point is Eric is fine and I'm here now and we can go home." But Calvin was already helping Eric put on his backpack. "We're not going home. Eric's coming with me." "What do you mean he's coming with you?" "I mean I'm taking him to Hayden's for the night, and you're gonna go home and think about what you've done." "You can't just take him, Calvin. I'm his mother." "And you left him alone in a car for 45 minutes to meet some guy about a job, at a mall, on a Saturday." The security guard was still writing in his report, and I realized this was all being documented. Every word, every detail. "This is ridiculous. It was one mistake, one time." "One time that we know of," Calvin said quietly, and something in his tone made my blood run cold. He took Eric's hand and started walking toward the exit. I followed them, trying to explain, trying to make him see reason. "Calvin, please, let's just go home and talk about this. You're overreacting." "Am I? Our 4-year-old son was found crying and alone in a running car while you were off doing God knows what with some guy. That seems like exactly the right amount of reaction to me." In the parking lot, he buckled Eric into his truck while I stood there feeling helpless and increasingly angry. This was so typical of Calvin, making everything into a huge dramatic production. Eric was fine, nothing bad had actually happened. "I could call the police, you know," I said as he closed Eric's door. "You can't just take him without my permission." Calvin looked at me for a long moment. "Go ahead and call them, Alina. I'm sure they'd love to hear all about the child neglect situation. They'll probably be reading about in the security report anyway." "Child neglect? Are you insane? I left him in the car for a few minutes." 45 minutes. With strangers finding him crying and scared. "But sure, call the cops. Let's see how that works out for you." He got in his truck and drove away, leaving me standing in the mall parking lot feeling like the whole world had turned upside down. This was insane. I was a good mother. I took care of Eric every single day. One tiny mistake and Calvin was acting like I was some kind of monster. I drove home in a daze, trying to figure out how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. In my head, I kept replaying the conversation, thinking of things I should have said, better ways I could have explained the situation. Calvin was being completely unreasonable. And now he had Eric thinking something terrible had happened when really, it was just a misunderstanding. That night, alone in the house, I called Calvin's phone over and over. Finally, around 10 p.m., he answered. "What, Alina?" "I want to talk to Eric. I want to say goodnight to him." "He's asleep." "Then wake him up. He's my son, too." "Your son who you abandoned in a parking lot today." "I didn't abandon him. God, Calvin, you're being so dramatic about this. I had an eye on the car the whole time. I was with Cole in his truck and I could see our car from there." The silence on the other end of the phone stretched so long I thought he'd hung up. "Cole?" he said finally. Shit. I hadn't meant to say that. The job interview was with someone named Cole. In his truck, in the mall parking lot, while you watched our car. "It's not what you're making it sound like." "What is it then, Alina? Explain it to me." I was quiet, trying to think of how to make this sound reasonable, but everything I came up with sounded worse. "That's what I thought," Calvin said. "Don't call here again tonight. Eric doesn't need to hear from you right now." "Calvin, wait." But he'd already hung up. The next morning, I expected him to bring Eric home. I made pancakes, Eric's favorite, and waited. By noon, I was furious. Calvin was being petty and vindictive, keeping my son away from me over something so minor. I called him again. "Bring Eric home, now." "No, Calvin, I'm serious. Bring him home or I'm calling the police." "Go ahead, I'd love to explain to them why I felt the need to remove my son from your care." "This is kidnapping. This is protecting my son from a mother who thinks it's okay to leave him alone in a car while she fucks around with some guy in a parking lot." I'd never heard Calvin talk like that before. He never swore, never raised his voice, never said anything deliberately cruel, but his voice was ice cold and I could tell he meant every word. "One mistake, Calvin. One mistake, and you're going to destroy our family over it?" "You destroyed our family the minute you decided getting laid was more important than our son's safety." "It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like, Alina? Explain to me what it was like." But I couldn't, because when I tried to put it into words, leaving Eric alone to have sex with another man in a mall parking lot, it did sound terrible. But it hadn't felt terrible at the time. It had felt like finally getting something I needed. "We can work through this," I said instead. "People make mistakes. We can go to counseling. We can figure this out." "Maybe," Calvin said, and for a second I felt hopeful. "But first you're going to have to explain it to a judge." "What?" "I'm filing for emergency custody tomorrow morning. Eric's staying with me until we get this sorted out legally." The phone went dead. I spent the rest of that day crying, raging, calling everyone I could think of who might talk sense into Calvin. But nobody wanted to hear my side. His parents, my parents, our mutual friends, they all acted like I'd committed some heinous crime instead of just making one small error in judgment. Monday morning, I was served with papers. Calvin was requesting full custody, claiming I was an unfit mother who had endangered our child. The petition included statements from the mall security guard, the woman who had found Eric in the car, and even some security camera footage Calvin had somehow obtained. Security camera footage. Of me getting into Cole's truck. Of the timestamp showing exactly how long I'd been gone. Of Eric crying in the car. My lawyer, the cheap one I could afford on short notice, told me it looked bad. Really bad. Emergency custody hearings were usually reserved for cases involving abuse or severe neglect, and a judge was likely to take the abandonment very seriously. But it was just one time, I kept saying, one mistake. "One time that was documented and witnessed," she replied. "And the affair component makes it worse. It shows a pattern of prioritizing your own desires over your child's welfare." The hearing was scheduled for Friday, exactly 72 hours after Calvin had filed. I had 3 days to prepare for the possibility of losing my son. Thursday night, I drove to Hayden's house. I knew that's where they were staying. Calvin had always been close with Hayden, and I figured he'd run there like he always did when he needed support. Hayden had never liked me much anyway. He was one of those guys who thought women were naturally manipulative and selfish, and he'd probably been in Calvin's ear all week telling him what a terrible wife and mother I was. I sat in my car outside Hayden's house for an hour, watching the windows, trying to get a glimpse of Eric. Finally, I couldn't stand it anymore. I marched up to the front door and pounded on it, Calvin answered, and he looked exhausted. Good, he should look exhausted. This whole situation was exhausting for everyone. I want to see Eric, I said. No, Calvin, please. I haven't seen my son in 4 days. 4 days. This is cruel. What's cruel is leaving a 4-year-old alone in a car while you cheat on your husband. It wasn't cheating, we were just talking. In his truck, for 45 minutes, while our son cried alone in a parking lot. Stop saying it like that. Stop making it sound worse than it was. How should I say it, Alina? How should I describe what you did? I could hear Eric's voice from inside the house, asking Hayden something about dinner. He sounded happy. Normal, like he wasn't even missing me. The hearing's tomorrow, I said. After that, we can work out a schedule. We can figure out how to co-parent, even if you don't want to be married to me anymore. Calvin was quiet for a long moment, just staring at me. You still don't get it, do you? Get what? You left our 4-year-old son alone in a car to have sex with another man. A stranger found him crying and scared, and you're standing here talking about co-parenting like this is just some normal divorce situation. People make mistakes, Calvin. This wasn't a mistake. This was a choice, a series of choices. You chose to start whatever this thing is with Cole. You chose to bring Eric with you to meet him. You chose to leave Eric alone in the car. You chose to ignore your phone while our son was scared and crying. You chose to lie to me, to the security guard, to everyone. These weren't mistakes, Alina. This is who you are. That's not who I am. I'm a good mother. Good mothers don't abandon their children for sex. I started crying then, big ugly sobs that made me sound desperate and pathetic. Please, Calvin. Please don't take him away from me. I love him so much. I love you both so much. If you loved us, you wouldn't have done this. The door closed in my face. The custody hearing was a nightmare. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, listened to all the evidence with obvious disapproval. The security footage was played on a screen for everyone to see. Me getting into Cole's truck, the timestamp showing 1:23 p.m., then footage of the woman finding Eric at 2:11 p.m., 48 minutes later. Eric crying, pointing toward the mall entrance, trying to explain where his mommy had gone. Calvin's lawyer presented statements from 3 different witnesses, the security report, and even a psychological evaluation they'd somehow arranged, claiming that my behavior showed serious lapses in judgment regarding child welfare. My lawyer did her best, but there wasn't much she could say. I'd left my 4-year-old alone in a car for nearly an hour to meet another man. No amount of legal maneuvering could make that sound acceptable. The judge awarded Calvin temporary full custody, with supervised visitation from me twice a week. Supervised, like I was some kind of danger to my own child. The court is deeply concerned, she said, about the respondent's decision-making and priorities, leaving a young child unattended in a vehicle to engage in what appears to be an extramarital encounter demonstrates a fundamental failure to prioritize the child's safety and well-being. I wanted to scream at all of them that they didn't understand, that it wasn't as black and white as they were making it seem, that I was a good mother who had made one mistake. But sitting in that courtroom, listening to the judge talk about my fundamental failure, I started to wonder if maybe I really was the monster everyone thought I was. After the hearing, I tried one more time to talk to Calvin. He was in the hallway with Eric, who ran to me crying, "Mommy," like nothing had changed. I hugged him tight, breathing in his little boy's smell, trying to memorize the feeling of his arms around my neck. "We don't need to go through with all this legal stuff," I said to Calvin over Eric's head. "We could just work things out between us, figure out a schedule that works for everyone." Calvin gently extracted Eric from my arms. "The schedule is twice a week, supervised, until you can prove to the court that you've addressed the issues that led to this situation." What issues? It was one mistake. The issue where you think this was just a mistake instead of a massive failure of judgment that could have gotten our son killed. Killed? Calvin, that's insane. He was never in any real danger. Remembering, he was 4 years old, alone in a running car, in a public parking lot for almost an hour. Anything could have happened. Someone could have taken the car, he could have put it in gear, he could have gotten out and wandered off looking for you. The fact that you can't see how dangerous that was is exactly why you need supervision. That was 6 months ago. I see Eric twice a week for 2 hours each time, with a social worker watching my every move. She takes notes on everything, how I talk to him, what activities we do, whether I seem appropriately focused on his needs versus my own. Calvin moved into a new apartment with Hayden's help. Eric seems happy there, settled. When I ask him about his new room or what he did with Daddy that week, he lights up with excitement. He's learned to ride a bike, started taking swimming lessons, made friends with the kids in their new building. His life has moved on without me in it. The divorce is still ongoing. Calvin's lawyer is pushing for the custody arrangement to be made permanent, claiming I haven't shown sufficient insight into my behavior or taken adequate steps to address my underlying issues. I've been going to counseling, parenting classes, everything the court recommended. But apparently, it's not enough. Cole stopped returning my calls after the first news story about the custody case ran in the local paper. Turns out he wasn't interested in the kind of drama that comes with dating a woman who loses custody of her child. He's probably moved on to some other bored housewife who thinks he's her ticket to feeling special again. Sometimes I sit in my empty apartment and try to figure out where everything went wrong. I was a good mother for 4 years. I changed diapers and stayed up with fevers and taught Eric to use the potty and read him bedtime stories every single night. I loved him completely, totally, with every fiber of my being. But none of that mattered in the end. What mattered was 48 minutes in a mall parking lot. 48 minutes that erased 4 years of good mothering and turned me into the kind of woman who loses custody of her own child. The worst part is that I still don't think I'm a monster. I think I'm a woman who made a bad decision, who let loneliness and the need to feel desired cloud her judgment for less than an hour. I think the punishment doesn't fit the crime. And I think Calvin used this situation as an excuse to end our marriage and take Eric away from me. But nobody wants to hear that. Nobody wants to hear that I was drowning in a life that felt too small, that I needed something just for me, that Calvin had checked out of our marriage long before I ever talked to Cole. Nobody wants to hear that I'm still Eric's mother, that I still love him more than anything, that losing him has destroyed me in ways I didn't know were possible. All they want to hear is that I left my child alone in a car to cheat on my husband. And technically, I guess that's exactly what I did.